So let's see about using command to do an actual HTTP request. HTTP.getString is sort of the most basic, simple version of how to do HTTP in Elm. So this is close to what Elm's HTTP.getString function looks like, but not quite. Let's just imagine hypothetically, what if it did look like this? So it said getString, so it's going to take a string for the URL. Okay, that part's actually how the real API looks. And then what if it just gave us back a command that said hey, I'm going to give you back a command, and it's got a string that's the response that comes out of that. So fundamentally, getString is saying, give me a URL, and I'm just going to do a GET request to a server that's at that URL. I'm just going to give you back the raw string that comes back. The problem here is this is making a pretty serious assumption that this is going to work. Random number generation, yeah, okay, that's going to work. We can have a command that just says, tell me what I want to pick from these greetings. That is 100% of the time going to work. It's always going to send a message back to update. HTTP, though, a lot of stuff can go wrong, right? There's a bazillion things that can go wrong. Is this really always going to produce a string? No, what if the server's down? What if the server's up, but I gave it an invalid URL and it's pointing to the wrong server? What happens if I get a 401 because I need to log in, or a 403 because this is some secret government website that I'm just never going to have access to? There's so many things that can go wrong. It could time out because I'm on a super slow connection, where it is not necessarily actually ever going to give me back a string. So to do this, this is the actual API for the HTTP request. When I say getString, it says, okay, give me the URL, and I'm going to give you back a request value. And that request value is just a description of, okay, here is the sort of parameters for this HTTP request. But we haven't yet specified how we're going to handle all the things that could go wrong with it. So this is sort of an intermediate value on the way to a command. It's a representation of okay, here's what I want to happen, but I haven't specified the details of how I'm going to handle all the possible things that could go wrong along the way to a command. So this type parameter on requests, this is only the result if the request succeeds. So if the request succeeds, great, we will get back a string. We know that from getString, and we'll see fancier things later that give us more direct things than string, or closer to what we actually want, like articles and stuff. And if it fails, HTTP has a custom error type that can model all those different scenarios for things that can go wrong. The way we actually go from a request to a command is using the http.send function. So send's job is basically, it accepts arguments that describe how we can translate failure into a message, and also how we can translate success into a message. So send says, give me a function that's going to translate a failure into a message, and give me a function that's going to translate a success into a message. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to perform the HTTP request, and I'm just going to hold on to those two functions, and we're going to see what happens. And if it fails, I'm going to call the failure one, and then great, I now know what message to send to update, and then update knows, okay, it failed, I'm going to handle that. And if it succeeds, great, then I'll call the other function, now I've got a message, send that message to update, and then again, update will be able to handle that. So this is a way of essentially specifying update is going to need to handle both of these possibilities in a way that's sort of baked into the API for HTTP. So here's an example of sort of using it in action. Call http.send, and we're going to kind of clean up this in a little bit. It's going to be a little bit less code than this, but I'm going to write it all out for this first one. So the first argument is here's how I'm going to translate failure into a message. I'm going to say I get a result, and this, by the way, is the same type of result that we saw when we were dealing with JSON decoders, which is to say it's either an OK or an error. It's that custom type that has those two variants. And we're just going to have a message that holds on to that result. So we're going to call it completed load feed. So this is what happens when load feed finishes. It's that HTTP request has completed. It's going to hold on to that result, which either has the error case, in which case the request failed, or the OK case, which means that we actually got a feed to work with. And then the other argument to http.send is the actual, hey, here's the request that describes what I want to go and attempt to do, and that is going to drive this result. By the way, anytime you notice this pattern where you see an anonymous function that takes one argument and then passes that as the argument to another function, you can just collapse that into the function itself. There's no need to write this whole thing out. We can just say http.send completed load feed and just sort of condense that right like this. So this is a little bit more concise. And also, the way that I would typically write this is I would actually just reorder those and do it as a pipeline. So this is essentially the same thing as what we had before, but written in a pipeline style, because I like to think of this as, okay, I want to do http.getString on this URL, and then I want to pipe that to http.send, and then here's what I want to do to handle the failure and success possibilities. So this is typically how I would actually do some HTTP requests in Elm. Start by saying, here's the request I want, and then pipe that to http.send, which says, here's the message that I want to get sent to update that will translate failure and success into a message so that update can handle both possibilities. Questions on that at a conceptual level?
So getString is taking something and it's just going to turn it into this request object. It's just take a string that's going to turn into a request object.
Right, so the string that it takes is the URL to go and hit, and then it's going to produce a string, which completed load feed will hold on to. So the type of that is, it's a result, and this is an http.error, so that's what it'll get if it fails. That'll be in the error branch. And the OK branch will be a raw string of just actual string that came back from the server. So we're going to get one or the other. If it succeeds, we'll get back a string. That's why it's called getString, because it just gets the raw string from the server. And if it errors, then we're going to get an HTTP error. Now, we're going to see in a second the fancier version of this that's going to take that string and actually like do something with it, like decode it from JSON or something like that. But fundamentally, getString is sort of the simplest way we can ask a server for something.
Okay, so it's specifically a way to request knowing you're going to get a string back.
Exactly, right, yeah. So this is like, I'm just, HTTP request, hey server, what's at this URL? And server says, barf, here is this whole string, deal with it. Not as useful as what we're about to work up to, but starting simpler. So http.send returns a command. At this point, we have a command. Update can return it, and everything else is going to work the same way that it has up to this point.